Hello everybody, this is Loci WayOfLoci and welcome to the No Hit Podcast. Here it is my job to interview the extraordinary people in gaming, the hitless runners who beat difficult games without taking a single hit or point of damage, speedrunners completing games in mere minutes that would normally take hours, or those who have finished games completely blindfolded, or the amazing content creators and developers out there producing the engaging and entertaining content and games that we all enjoy. Today's guest is BenderZGreat. That's BenderZGreat on Twitch and BenderZGreat on YouTube. Bender has completed a plethora of different hitless challenges, primarily of Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring, with a couple of his amazing runs including Elden Ring all 165 bosses, and his Dark Souls 3 Master Run being done on NG+7, the hardest scaled playthrough you can do in the game, with super low damage restrictions on top. Both we go into, as well as how Bender approaches learning and routing runs, the appeal of randomizer runs, especially with Elden Ring, and much, much more. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Bender. Right, Bender, thanks so much for taking the time out. I know it took a little bit of a while for us to get this arranged, but really glad we're finally doing it. How are you doing today, man?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it. I'm doing all right. Thanks for asking, and yeah, looking forward to this discussion.
Going to be going into all things runs related, but did want to start. So for the people who maybe reading or hearing your name for the first time, may have in mind a certain animated character. And I was wondering how Bender from Futurama came to be like your, I guess, online persona or like the profile pic and emotes and all that, like the start of your channel or with the runs.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much Bender is great. Like, that's just it. Futurama is one of my favorite shows, and I just thought, Bender, like, he's one of my favorite characters from any show, but I also thought he would be good in terms of, like, I don't know, emotes and images and maybe sound bites or anything like that. So when I was trying to come up with a Twitch name, Bender just seemed like a perfect fit. He's, a bit of a rascal or whatever, so he can have a fun time with it. And I also think he's pretty recognizable. Like from that show, Bender's one of the most recognizable characters, no doubt. So that's mostly what it was. I just really enjoyed the show, and I think Bender is amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I think everyone, like, immediate thought is to it, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So that's where it comes from.
And when you was creating, was that for hitless running, or was you doing something in streaming before that even came to be, or challenge runs?
Apparently I made this account quite some time ago. I think this account is like 10 to 12 years old, but I don't even remember making a Twitch account. I didn't start watching Twitch really until basically COVID, and I was working from home, and so I was watching from home. It's even possible that this account was under a different name before that. I actually don't remember, but at some point I did decide, I wanted Bender to be sort of the theme of my name. Yeah. And yeah, when it came to streaming, at least, like, I got started streaming pretty much purely because I decided I wanted to do no hit runs. But this account actually is much older than that, even though I never used it for many years. So, but yeah, in terms of the actual streaming, I basically got started with that because I wanted to, just have some record of working on the no hit runs, and if and when I do get them, actually have some VOD, which is kind of funny with Twitch's recent changes on VODs and everything, but it is what it is.
Yeah. I honestly thought they would maybe not change it completely, but I honestly thought they would at least have some response for that with like the storage limits coming in next month at the time of recording. But no, it's still going ahead. So bit of a shame.
Yeah. It's kind of odd too. Just like, you have to imagine that this is something they would have seen coming for a while. And this does seem like a rather kind of harsh change with not much heads up. So I'm not really sure what's going on, but it is unfortunate. That is like one of the main reasons why I started streaming, was I just wanted I wanted to have highlights of important stuff, whether it was a run or just whatever else. And that's becoming very difficult to do nowadays. So it's unfortunate, but again, it just is what it is.
I definitely had similar thoughts because I sort of started in the same position of I only started streaming to have, like you say, a record of runs completed, like someone to save as well as YouTube, but like you do the runs on Twitch, they're saved on Twitch, like you have that record of stuff that you've done and over the years, and it's a shame. I was speaking with Zoodle a couple of weeks ago about the amount of speed runs, like on speedrun.com, that are about to just get wipes, like intentionally or unintentionally, and it's just I don't envy the position of the mods who got to, like, on various like speedrun boards and having to have to deal with all that now.
Yeah, that's really true. And that was something that didn't cross my mind until recently too, was I'm not exactly sure, but I mean, when you highlight something, I don't know if the date that it shows on the highlight is the date that you made that a highlight or the original date of that stream or whatever. But that is some reasonable record of when that actually happened. Like if I highlighted something, it was within the past couple of months of a stream that I did or whatever.
Yeah.
And so you have some reasonable record that it was done, within a certain time frame. And now, if people are downloading old VODs, old highlights from Twitch and uploading them on YouTube, sort of that record of when it actually occurred is kind of murky because people could just claim whatever. And so it is really unfortunate how it's going. So I don't know. It just is what it is. Like, what else can you do about it?
Yeah,
Twitch has already made up their mind. And if they're going to go forward with it, we'll all just have to adapt, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Going on to cheery stuff. So speaking of Hitless, I believe the first run was DS1. Is that right? Or
It was Dark Souls Remastered, and I got into No Hit because I was watching Hob and Nico, Dino Singile, and the Happy Hob for anybody who may not be familiar. Which, if you know about No Hit, you probably should know about both of them, especially Hob. Hob is the first No Hit runner. He was the man who started it all, and he's still doing them. And then Nico, also really got very much followed Hob's footsteps and did a whole bunch of marathon runs. And yeah, I found out about them. I think, like I was saying, I only really started watching Twitch during COVID, and I mostly started watching speedrunners, but then I found out about No Hit and was like, oh man, this is really cool. Started watching a bit of it and eventually got motivated to try it myself. And that's kind of, the rest is history. But yeah, specifically with Dark Souls, it was, Dark Souls Remastered. And that was, I would have just barely started up about 4 years ago, right around this time 4 years ago, which is wild to think. And I got the run. It took a little bit over a month, but I already had a lot of time in Dark Souls 1. So I had a decent amount of experience in that game. And at one point, I did, before I got into No Hit, I did actually attempt to learn a speed run in Dark Souls 1, but it was the worst possible way you could have ever done it because it was some goofy route that was on, somebody posted it on an internet forum or something like that, and it was going to get the Gravelord Greatsword or something like that. It was a really terrible way of trying to learn how to speed run a game. And I tried it for a couple of days and dropped it, but then I got into No Hit and it was okay, this is a little bit more my pace. I enjoy this a bit more. And I worked on it for a few weeks and eventually got the run. And what I did to get started is funny because literally, a lot of runners do something like this. It's just kind of funny to think on it nowadays because things are different. But literally all I did was pull up Hob's run in Dark Souls Remastered and just copied that route completely. Which it wasn't not the original No Hit in Dark Souls 1, but when Dark Souls Remastered came out, the first day it came out, he no hit it right away because it's pretty much completely identical to the original release. But yeah, I just watched his route and I started learning, his route and all the pickups and the upgrades and levels and everything. And I just started making notes and kind of copying that completely. I had no idea what I was doing, but it ended up working out. And yeah, that was how I got started in No Hit.
I think that's a common approach for many people. If you want to try something, you normally go, whether it's No Hit runs, you go to someone who has done a No Hit run and look at the route they've done and try and copy it as best you can. Or if you go into a speed run, you go to the boards and go, okay, what does the world record holder do? And sometimes you want to go a little bit lower down, for maybe not as skippy depending on the speed run, but it's a very common, we all do it, don't we? Just go and see who's done it.
Absolutely.
Let's try and see if we can emulate it.
Definitely. That's definitely a very common thing. And I think it's a little bit easier to do that nowadays because there are so many guides and tutorials and tools and resources out there to do all that kind of stuff. So there was still a bit of that at the time, but there wasn't a guide. I just pulled up somebody's run and copied it. And I didn't, I'm trying to think, there are a lot more guides nowadays than there were back then for sure. So it is easier to get into it. I think V-Sweat always put it nice is that it's always getting easier to get into No Hit runs. And that's very true with all of the community knowledge and all of the guides and tutorials and resources that are out there. That's very much true. But yeah, pretty much what I did was just blindly copy what somebody else did. I had no idea what I was doing. And then, over time, got a bit better at it. So I think that's a pretty common path. But it is kind of funny looking back on it and thinking that's how I got started, was just blindly copying what Hob did.
So what would you say if your approach would be now, with the knowledge you had and you were starting a completely brand new, fresh run, say a game that you've not got any experience in, but you done like a playthrough, what would be the approach now versus back then?
Yeah, well, I would still like the example that's in my head when I'm thinking of that is Dark Souls 2 because
Okay.
I've only played the game maybe 3 times total or something like that. Like my first playthrough way back in the day, and then a couple of playthroughs in like recent years. So if I wanted to learn how to no hit that game, I've already seen a fair bit of it. So it's kind of hard to imagine it completely from scratch. But just playing the game a little bit and like roughly getting familiar with the mechanics of the game and the controls and the general flow of the game. So I have some minimal knowledge going in. You can go into a game completely blind and learn it, like learn how to do no hit in that game if you want to.
Yeah.
But I really prefer getting some actual knowledge of the game before going into that nowadays. And then as much as you can, it's hard to do and it's going to differ from one game to another, one community from another, but like start building up some tools and resources, some info about like, I don't know, how actual mechanics work, some actual info. There's a lot of like spreadsheets that get made, and maybe that's more common in like speedrun communities, but stuff like that is available for no hit too. But go into it and yeah, I guess just try and route it out and get an idea from it. But it's really good to have some feedback from other people. That's one thing that's always nice about a Twitch chat is that there tend to be some people out there who know a thing or two and can give you some feedback. Somebody who's already done it before, or some people who have more knowledge of the game than you, and they can confirm and or deny, and you get a little bit of feedback from somebody. That's a big deal. It's hard to just do it completely on your own. So getting a little bit of back and forth with somebody is always a good thing. But yeah, just getting some basic game knowledge at first is really important. If somebody else has done it before, I probably would go ahead and still look at a guide a little bit or look at a run and get a rough idea of what's going on, and then just try and figure things out for myself after that and learn from there, which that feels very familiar to when the first run I did in Elden Ring was sorcery only any percent, and I feel like that's how it went. I never had done a magic no hit run in any game, and I didn't know that much about Elden Ring either, so I did watch somebody else's run, but when I went in and started trying it, I realized that I had no idea what I was actually doing. Like I tried to take notes on what they were doing, but I missed so many details that I felt like I was kind of lost for a day or two, and then all of a sudden I started looking into it more and realized, oh, okay, I see the info of why this item exists, why you use it here and don't use it elsewhere and stuff like that, and start connecting the dots. But it's tough. Like it's tough to do. If you're trying to go into something and you don't have tons of knowledge of it already, it makes a lot of sense to start looking at other runs, guides, stuff like that to get some idea of, how to approach it or whatever. So that makes a lot of sense.
It's the case with a lot of guides. As you say, there can be the case of like learning a run through a guide or a playthrough or copying, but there can be cases of the why behind there's a certain dodge or why you pick up a certain thing or why you don't punish certain attacks, which you can only really learn through like in boss fights is this example of like fighting and making the mistakes and realizing, oh, this is why the guide maker has said not to punish this attack because he can do this on the rare occasion, and you can only learn that really through, I guess, being greedy in some cases.
Yeah, that's tough to do. Like if you're looking into a guide or you're watching somebody's run, hopefully like a good I think that's one way that you can tell that a guide is good is that, it tells you what to do, but it also tells you what to avoid. And that's just as important, if not more important. And like after I did Dark Souls Remastered, the next run that I did was Dark Souls 3 any percent because I didn't really want to continue with Dark Souls 1 at the time. Like it was fine, but at the time I was mostly watching marathon runners and you see guys hopping from one game to another or whatever. And so that was just kind of in my mind that's a next logical step. And Dark Souls 3 was the next game, like in terms of the games, the From games, that was the next best one in terms of like my game knowledge or whatever. And I also liked it a lot. But I followed Nico's guide. Dino had made a no-hit guide for Dark Souls 3, and I think he's remade it since then. But his guide back then, I remember being quite good because he did exactly that. He talked about, okay, this is what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, but there's these rare niche scenarios that you've got to be aware of and stuff like that. So it's good to really pay attention to the details that are going on, listen for that kind of stuff, and you got to keep it in your mind a little bit so that when you do actually experience it yourself, you connect the dots on that and realize, oh, okay, this is what's going on. Now I have a little bit better understanding of what's happening around here, and you can refine your way of this is what I want to do and this is what I want to avoid. That is really, really valuable to have that kind of info. But that's sort of if I'm looking at a guide, that's one thing to look for is, not just telling you what to do or how to do it, but like what's the logic behind it? What are you trying to avoid? All that kind of stuff. That is equally as important. So for sure, that's something to look out for in those kinds of things.
Definitely. I did want to say about DS3, as just looking like on the profile and on your channel when research for this, there is like a plethora of DS3 runs. So I was interested.
There is.
What was it about DS3 that like kick-started like the Hitless stuff properly? Just to get...
Probably a few different things. I think ultimately what it comes down to is I just really like the way that game feels. Like, even if I'm just playing it casually, but also for no hit, I really do enjoy it. It just feels very fluid. That's the thing that has always attracted me to these games, is the level of control that you have over your character, that you are very much in direct control, and it just feels the best for me in Dark Souls 3. And also the boss fights, no doubt. That's one thing about Dark Souls 1 that's, fine, but the game is older and their level of design, their level of finesse was a bit lower at the time. So the bosses aren't quite as good in Dark Souls 1 as they are in Dark Souls 3, at least in general. There are, exceptions. But that's what drew me to, that's what like attracted me to the game a lot. And working on no hit runs, it feels very satisfying to complete runs or to do something correctly, successfully in that game, to get past something that is really difficult. And especially when it's given you trouble in the past and you get there again and get past it, it's a very satisfying feeling. It feels like a very satisfying game to run. And I think that general feeling scales well as you do low damage runs. That's something that I focused on for a long time. Was, I started with like your typical any percent, but then gradually over the course of like the next 2.5 years, I kept on progressing through more and more like low damage type stuff, or I'd take on more as well. Like I would switch from any percent to all bosses and do runs at SL1, do them with no weapon upgrades. But that feeling of the bosses being challenging but satisfying is still there when you're fighting demon princes for 22 minutes and you finally get through and can move on. And that's just an incredibly good feeling. Like being able to go into a game and know that you'll have that you can have that feeling and actually get through and make it happen. It's just immensely rewarding. So it just feels good to run the game at the end of the day. That's really what it comes down to. And even though the game is like Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3 have that same thing where they are very linear. Dark Souls 2 has a bit more openness to it, but I don't mind the linearity of the games. That's not really an issue. And I still think that the way that they're done, it's still pretty good that there's some nice options along the way, and it gives you some interesting it gives you some interesting options depending on the run and the restrictions that you're doing. There's a lot to consider with the game, and I don't know, there's a lot of options with it. It's just that's really what it comes down to. It's a very satisfying game to run. It feels good to play, and despite the linear design that some people don't really care for, there's still some fun, interesting stuff that you can do with the game, and that makes it worth playing, for thousands of hours for some people. So that's how I feel about it, basically.
I want to ask, so just talk about like the satisfying feeling of like completing the bosses, like no hit on low damage, or even just like in the any percent runs. Just going to what you said earlier about when you like started watching Twitch, like you watched a lot of speed runs and then no hit stuff, and it was the no hit that appealed to you more and got you into doing runs. Was it that like completion aspects of that in a no hit run? It's sort of final in terms of I beat this boss no hit, I've done this no hits. Was that the appeal over something like a speed run or something else?
Yeah, that like I don't do speed runs very often. Every once in a while I will dabble in them a little bit, but you can, given a particular category or whatever, you can just keep doing that kind of endlessly. And I don't really like that kind of endless grind. It just doesn't really appeal to me, I guess. Like I understand why it would for some people, for sure. And it could be very satisfying to work hard for a while and get a new PB, and then you feel like you've sort of upped your game a significant amount and you can keep on repeating that cycle of that. But I do really like that with no hit runs, you have your specific goal, you obtain it, and you move on to something else. And it's not like nobody can really take that away from you unless somebody goes back and watches it and finds out you did actually get hit or something like that. But that's pretty rare to happen. But like with a speed run, you could have a world record or something, and somebody can take it away from you. Nobody's going to take away a no hit run from you. Once you've done it, you've done it, and that's just I do like that sort of finality of it, that it's done. I can move on to another challenge, and there it is. Which is also why I've been hesitant to ever take on a marathon run, because I've seen the grind that some people put in on certain marathon runs, and I just don't know if I want to do that. I find it. I do find it really satisfying to sink my teeth into a single game and really try and learn the ins and outs of it a lot. That's just interested me more. That being said, like, I've never actually tried marathon runs, so I can't judge too harshly. Who knows? Maybe someday I will do something like that. But in terms of like, comparing kind of no-hit runs to speed runs, I do really like that you can have this specific, what's the word I'm trying to come up with? I can't think of the word for it, but you just have this specific goal that you can obtain and move on and do something else, and you can repeat that cycle. That's very fun to do for me, so for sure.
I attribute it because I'm pretty much the same in why I preferred Hitless stuff over speedrun stuff. And an aspect that I didn't like sort of was in speedrun, pretty much every second counts in terms you can like stress about every second or every so, depending on how long the run is, as opposed to a Hitless where you can take your time, you can relax. So I find that sort of challenge relaxing because you can choose to spend as much time as you want setting up or grinding or those sorts of things, as opposed to speedrun. Every second matters.
That's funny you say that, because one of the more recent things that I've done, you mentioned that you probably talked to Zoodle recently. I don't know if he brought up this bounty pub that he and a few others have started. But so this bounty pub, for anybody listening who doesn't know, it's a community of people, and every couple of weeks or so there are new bounties put out there, new challenges of some kind. Usually there's two of them. One of them is a big bounty, and that generally focuses on some sort of competitive goal, and a lot of times it comes down to speed. Whatever you're doing, whoever does it the fastest, that's sort of the format of that. And then the smaller bounty is usually you've got a specific objective in the game to do, and there may still be a little bit of a speed element to it. Like maybe they'll be considered a top 3, but the goal is more attainable. It's more accessible for most people. They're just simply find this boss or these bosses and kill them within so much time. And with a bit of, practice and maybe a little bit of help, a lot of people can do that. But the big bounties are more focused on speed. And recently they did one, which I really got into, and I had a ton of fun with it. So it was a randomizer any % speed run. We had a fixed randomizer seed, so it didn't change. It was the same randomization of the game.
This is all
our goal was
sorry, you might mention Elden Ring. Just to mention, you might have already said, but just
I'm glad you clarified.
No worries.
No, I'm glad you clarified. That wasn't Elden Ring. Good point. So this was Elden Ring any % randomizer speed run, and we used the same randomizer seed. So people would scout out items and try and put together, oh, this is a good option for getting upgrade materials. Here's some good weapons and items that you can get, and yada yada yada. And over time, we try and form a good route, and people run it, and whoever comes up with the fastest time, I think the top 3 was sort of like the goal for that challenge. But I really sunk my teeth into that because I love randomizers, especially in these games, and with it being a randomizer, there's a lot of routing that you can do. There's a lot of exploration and discovery, going around and finding these items, and theory crafting about, oh, what if we go over here for these upgrade materials and some other items that are convenient, as opposed to this alternative, what's really faster and all this other stuff. It was a lot to do, but it was super, super fun to route and to work on. But when it came to actually doing runs, I cannot tell you how many times I got tilted by like a squirrel getting in my way and slowing me down by like 2 seconds. It's absolutely true that like you can just get kind of tilted at the most minor time loss, because that is your goal. Be as fast as possible. And when anything hinders you from doing that, especially when it's something that's largely out of your control, that is kind of frustrating, right? Like you're not really doing anything wrong, and you feel like you're getting punished.
But the game's just doing its own thing, and you're begging it to work with you, but it's just not.
And with these games in particular, because so many things come down to RNG, the way that enemies behave and move and stuff like that. There's such a large element of randomness. So on the one hand, how well can you respond to it? But on the other hand, sometimes the game just screws you over and you don't really have an alternative. And that can be very frustrating to do. And I think with no hit, being generally slower paced at that, you have more good options for dealing with that kind of stuff. And you don't have that pressure of I need to be moving as fast as possible at all times. It's I think that's largely why people consider no hit maybe a more casual challenge in speedruns, but it's also much easier on the mental game. And that matters a lot in the long term, especially. You need to make sure that you're enjoying what you're doing and you're not really getting frustrated at it, because it's just going to ruin your enjoyment completely. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The element of like getting tilted at any minor thing, that is something I've felt in the little bit of time that I've done speedruns. So
I do want to go further into the approach to like routing runs, especially longer runs.
Yeah.
I have in mind your all bosses, but I think it's probably going to be easier to start the smaller end and then work way up. Because you mentioned earlier that your first any percent was sorcery. I was interested in why that particular one in Elden Ring. Just to clarify.
It was sorcery only any percent in that game. And also, I'm not sure if you finished your question, so go ahead and continue if you had more.
No, that was it. Sorry, just wanted to check Elden Ring and not DS3 because we spoke about it earlier.
Yeah. So, right before doing that, in fact, the run that I had just finished up in Dark Souls 3 was SL1 no weapon upgrades, any percent, which that's a really fun run. That is, like, it's difficult, level 1, no weapon upgrades, you're getting into low damage, like significantly lower damage than normal. But, before I get into the Elden Ring stuff, one reason why the Dark Souls 3 run, the SL1 no weapon upgrades, was so satisfying and fun was because of like the variety in your build throughout that run. There's a lot of different weapons and spells that you can use on that run, and it's really fun to do. You start off with a club, you grab a broadsword, you have a dagger, you have the bandit's knife. You can grab some larger weapons when you have the stat boosting rings, but pyromancy is also very, very useful in that kind of a run. Now, I didn't actually use pyro in my any percent. I used it when I did SL1 no upgrades all bosses, but I knew that pyro was an option. But basically at that point, like, I had mostly done all melee runs in Dark Souls 3. And so when it came to Elden Ring, the idea of like, do I want to start with melee? Do I want to try magic? What would I like to do? Well, a couple of magic runners had recently completed runs, and one of them was Flippius, who I don't think he's done runs in years now, but he just completed a faster sorcery any percent, and that was the route that I looked at when I wanted to get into Elden Ring. I knew that he had just completed that run like a couple days prior, so it was fresh in my mind. I had this idea that I kind of wanted to look into magic a little bit, and his route sounded decent. He had already done sorcery no hit, but it required going and getting Kama d'Azur, which is like the big Kamehameha spell in Elden Ring, and there's a lot of setup involved to use that effectively. So it was a long run, and I understand why people look at Kama d'Azur and consider it to be kind of a cheesy spell. And so this idea of his faster route, where he wasn't using Kama d'Azur, he was using like more accessible spells that there's a bit more variety in them, that really intrigued me. And he had just completed the run, so the timing was just right. I pulled up his run, and that was where I got lost because I didn't really pay attention to the details when I was watching his run. But when I sat down and tried it for myself for the first time, I realized like, okay, something's wrong with my damage. I'm clearly doing something wrong here. And I can't remember if I went back and reviewed his run again, or maybe I just like actually pulled up the item descriptions and realized, oh, this is why you use this staff here and not this staff and all this other stuff, and started connecting the dots that way. But that was basically how I got into the sorcery run. Was somebody had already completed a run recently, and it was kind of just on my mind already that I wanted to try magic because I had done melee so much, and the timing just worked out perfectly. So that's kind of how that all fell into place there. You were asking about like routing, though. I don't know if I fully answered that question. So was there more that you were asking about with like the routing aspect of that?
Yeah, just wanted to touch on like the 90% just before we jump into like the big one. Because
okay, yeah, sure.
So the all bosses of Elden Ring, which of anyone who has played Elden Ring, the base game has about 165 bosses. Obviously, depending on which way you define as boss, but most people agree it's 165 bosses, which you did no hits, sorcery only, I believe. And in such a game like Elden Ring, being both open world but also having linear aspects like the castles, the catacombs, the caves, there are those tight and close spaces, not just open world, but there is so many options to the game in both deciding where to go, which order. How do you start in such a run, and what was your like approach to learning or doing that sort of large run?
Yeah, with Elden Ring especially, there's a lot to consider. Like people will say that Elden Ring is one of the easier games to run, but if you're a new runner, that's not going to be true. That's my opinion because like there's really a lot that you need to understand about the game. Like if you have some familiarity with these games and with no hit runs, then yeah, Elden Ring is going to be a bit more accessible and probably easy for you to no hit compared to other ones. But there's a lot to do because just in general with the route, like routing these games comes down to two things. You have your running sections and you have your boss fights. That's what it comes down to ultimately. So, how do you progress through these areas? How do you fight the boss? Move on to the next area and do the same thing. That's fundamentally what you're doing. But like you were saying, with Elden Ring, with it being fairly open, how do you decide which places to go and which bosses to fight? And it just sort of depends. Like ultimately, it just has to come down to whatever makes sense. But usually with Elden Ring, you have this restriction. You can't get into Lane Dell until you have acquired 2 Great Runes. So you need to defeat 2 Great Rune bosses before you can get into Lane Dell and progress through the end of the game. Once you get into Lane Dell, everything is pretty linear. So that aspect of the run, the later aspect is pretty simple because it's fairly linear. It's fairly straightforward and there's not a whole lot you really need to consider. The early part is the tough part, and it's mostly just because realistically there are 4 Great Rune bosses available to you. You've got Godric, Radahn, Renala, and Rykard. And yeah, technically you can go to Mohg, but going to Mohg as one of your early Great Rune bosses is not going to be so common on most
A
runs.
choice. It is a choice.
Yeah, it is a choice. It is a decision. So at least with like sorcery, going through Stormveil makes a lot of sense because you also acquire Godric's Great Rune and you can activate that Great Rune, and that's a very useful thing to have on your run because what Godric's Great Rune does is it adds 5 levels to each of your attributes. So that's 40 free levels. That's huge for any run you're going to do pretty much, unless you're doing something that doesn't allow stat boosting or whatever. So that's a pretty obvious choice, and most runners have already like started focusing so much on Stormveil and defeating Margit and Godric. So that's already like a pretty well understood thing. Go through there early. That's probably your first Great Rune boss. Get that Great Rune activated, get those extra levels, and that's going to help you push on from there. So that makes sense, but just understanding what the tools and resources available to you in the early game are all about, that's difficult. That's going to take some time and experience, but that's one of those things like when you see all the advantages of focusing on Godric early, okay, that makes sense. Let's do that for sure. And then, so now we have 3 other Great Rune bosses. Radahn is fairly accessible, and most builds are going to be pretty good against him. Renala, probably not good if you're doing a magic build. Like if you're doing a sorcery build, it's probably the last place you want to go for a Great Rune boss fight because Renala is terrible with sorcery. So that's one of those easy choices. Like when you start trying to figure out what makes sense, you're going to pretty quickly realize that Renala does not make sense. And then Rykard, like everybody's got a different definition of like something only, but when it comes to like sorcery only, for me, I have to defeat the boss with sorcery. I can't go and use the Serpent Hunter and get by him. So the choice is already made for me in that case. It's just a matter of understanding it and like realizing that. It comes down to Godric and Radahn. Boom. I have access to Lane Dell, go through the end and figure out the strats I work on boss fights. So that's just kind of what it comes down to. But getting there, yeah, that's easier said than done. It takes a bit of practice and a bit of thinking and trial and error to come to those conclusions and realize what makes sense. But that is what is needed a lot, is a bit of trial and error and ultimately just realizing, what makes the most sense in the end. That's pretty much it. Like that's your approach. That's my approach when trying to route something, is just, does this make sense to do? And when I'm running through again, I keep that in my mind. And very recently I've seen that where like, oh, there's a lot of things that I'm doing that don't really make sense. Let me try something different. It actually just happened yesterday or 2 days ago, I think, where I tried something different and it just worked out perfectly and it makes so much sense. Of course I'm going to do it this way from now on. And that's like the kind of thing that you're looking for is, this makes so much sense. I'm just going to focus on it this way. I'm just going to do it, and we'll continue and work around that afterward and go from there. And eventually things click together with that kind of a process. So that's mostly how it goes.
Do you have an example of, or maybe something concrete of something that makes that like has the meaning of make sense, or maybe something that flags up as something not making sense? Like if you're doing a routing section or a boss, what is a flag of you going, okay, this does not make sense, or this needs changing?
Yeah, so like the example with Renala would be I go there with sorcery and I see that she's incredibly resistant to magic damage. In that particular case, she's got like 80% defense against magic. So most of what I have available is just horrible. And that's where it's like, okay, this is just going to be a terrible fight. Do I really want to do this on a no-hit run? Like, remember the context of what you're thinking about is, would I want to run through this section so many hours into a no-hit run? Would I want to fight this boss, 2 or 3 hours in with this kind of damage? You just got to factor all of the things that are coming together. How are you feeling about your build? How are you feeling about what you're going up against in terms of a running section or a boss fight? And at this particular point in the run, would you feel comfortable doing this, or are you going to be sweating bullets and it's going to be really hard to do? But like at least with the sorcery example, the damage against something like Godric and Radon works out very well with like relatively minimal setup on a sorcery build, and I don't have to go super far out of my way to get something to kill him. I can do it, relatively efficiently. And also, what are you getting out of that? Like what is the reward for doing that thing at that particular time? With Godric, you get the Great Rune active and you get a bunch of free levels by doing that. Killing Radon, you get your second Great Rune, but you also get a lot of runes to level up, and it makes your build very strong, and that sets you up very well for going into Lanedale and progressing to the end of the game. But that's something that's going to differ a little bit for every runner, but you just got to remember the context of like everything you're doing. What sort of build am I going for? How do I feel fighting this boss at this point in a run, and what am I getting out of it? Does it make sense to do all of this, or can I structure it a little bit differently and things start working better? That's sort of the mental approach, is just keeping as much in mind as you can, and sitting down and taking that time to consider, does this work? Could it work differently? And then actually try it and see what works the best in the end, I guess. So
because to give some context for people listening, this all bosses run we're talking about, at least in YouTube time, obviously there's breaks chatting, it's not like a full focus like down it. Took about 14 hours in terms of like the time on the videos that I've seen.
Yeah. So that's a long run.
So I was interested in such a run. Obviously, it's one that you don't, well, that will likely end up doing multiple runs of it, but obviously you want to restrict that as much as possible because it is a large amount of time. So just with that precursor, wanted to ask how, with either a routing section or a boss, if there's a difference between them or not, where do you find, okay, what's the best way to describe this? When can you put a sticker on a section and say I'm comfortable putting this in the run? Because it could be like an 8-hour sec. Like this is the 8-hour point section that I need to go. Okay, I'm comfortable putting this into the run. How do you establish that?
That's tough. And like again, when you're trying to approach this, everybody's gonna have their own different feeling about it. So trust your gut. But at the same time, it's very helpful to have feedback where somebody can tell you, hey, this looks like this is good, or I don't think this is very good because of something that they know about that could happen or whatever. That's a tough one. And with a run like that, like the way that whole run went, so it was all bosses, no hit, sorcery only. So I only deal damage to enemies using sorceries. I couldn't use like the Serpent Hunter on Rykard and stuff like that. And I also did one other restriction on that, which was all offensive sorceries, which means that I acquired and used every offensive sorcery in the game that was available at that time. This was before the DLC came out for Elden Ring. So that comes out to about 60 sorceries. And the thing is that like when I started routing this run, that was not the goal. The goal was sorcery, all bosses, no hit. And progressively as we were going through it, I realized, man, sorcery is really, really strong. I can probably do this without, using any other source of damage. So even like directly hitting an enemy with a sleep pot, that only does 1 point of damage, but I just tried to work it in that 100% of the damage that I dealt came from sorceries. But that was something that gradually came to be over time. And it was the same with the offensive sorceries part, where I wasn't planning to use all offensive of sorceries. Actually, thinking about it, that run, the way that it played out, I just did one playthrough at the beginning where I just went through the entire game, all 165 bosses, and just killed them with sorceries, just to get a rough idea of, is this even possible? You know, would this actually make sense to do as a run? I think all I did was like, I didn't level health, and I just made occasional save files here and there for like when you have that first time boss encounter and it's a special thing or whatever, so that I could try that over and over. But I just kept on trying different things and eventually realized, okay, yeah, this build is really, really strong. I'm pretty certain that 165 bosses can be killed with just sorceries. And then it turned into like actual routing for a run. And then as we were going, I realized, you know, there's actually a lot of really cool spells that we're already getting naturally along the way, or that I can get here and there, and trying the different combinations of, you know, this sorcery against this particular boss. You start finding some really cool combinations that, like, this particular type of sorcery works really, really well against this type of boss, and it's worth it to go a little bit out of your way to get that spell early so that you can use it later. And then it eventually just kept on snowballing into, well, I'm already getting like 35 or 40 of the sorceries in the game. Why don't I just try using all of them? And then it becomes a challenge of like, okay, now I need to find that one niche combination of this spell against this boss is going to work reasonably on a run. And we did that for every spell and it worked out. And so that's how we approached it. But that's like a very gradual process as well. Like with a run that big, I think it's best to not have any expectations that like you're just going to route it and go for it. You're going to be doing a lot of routing and rerouting over and over and over again until things start clicking. Things, you know, you feel like you've got a completely scripted kill on so many bosses that you actually feel comfortable taking on a run of this size. And that took months to get to that point. And then I put in the grind and then got the run. And that's like ideally how you would kind of want to do it. You work on the run, routing and practicing and testing until, you know, it's tough to do for 165 splits, but you go through and see, okay, I feel comfortable with every single one of these. I have good notes telling me, you know, exactly the setup that I need to do, the spell that I'm using, the buff sequence. Is there anything special that I need to note in the running sections, all that kind of stuff. And it was a very gradual process to get to that point where I actually felt comfortable really going for that run. I think it would have been a big mistake to route it and then just start going for it, because then you start seeing all these problems and it's gonna feel bad, and you feel like you're forced to reroute instead of starting with that mentality at the beginning and you know, working through it until you get to the point where you're naturally comfortable enough to go for this run. That was generally how I tried to approach it. But there are some places in that run. One in particular is Rykard. Rykard is an absolute pain for anything other than the Serpent Hunter, pretty much. There are some exceptions maybe, but sorcery is one case where as much as I tried, I still could not come up with something that was truly 100% scripted. And I had something that was actually really solid. Phase 1 was completely scripted, and like as he's dying at the end of phase 1, I'm doing like 4 things before the phase transition, the cutscene, to set up phase 2. And if it goes well, I can bring his health down about 50%, but then I just have to fight him anyway. And just fighting Rykard can be kind of scary when you're not using that Serpent Hunter. And that was tough because in that particular case, like I have to get my build so strong that I can do what I want to do in phase 1 and be able to survive and deal some damage in phase 2 and get through. So I end up not fighting Rykard until like 8 hours into my run, and that's more than the halfway mark. And I think that was the final like difficult boss of that run. And that's tough. Like that's one of those times where on a no-hit run, you just got to go in, you're going to have some nerves, trust that your routing is good, trust that your testing and practicing was good, understand what's needed for the execution as much as possible, and do the thing and hope it works and respond as best as you can. Sometimes that's just what it comes down to. That's a pretty good example of that right there. And then after that, it's like 5 hours of cleanup and then the run is done. So it's tough to work on a run that big. There's just so much to to understand, to take in. But even with smaller runs, I think it's generally good to have that mentality of you want a gradual process to it until you really feel comfortable going for the run. I think it's not a great approach where you just sort of route it and you feel like you have half an understanding and then you just go straight into the grind. And I've seen people do it and it's rough. It's tough on the mental game. I think I did it myself for a while early on, and I realized that's not good for me. And I think maybe that's another thing too, is like if you do go for a run, like when you start going for attempts, whenever the run inevitably dies, then you just have to reset to that mentality of, okay, well now I need to make sure that the rest of the run is feeling good. And if there's something that goes wrong along the way, I need to try and patch it up. I need to try and improve it and make sure that I've, got this run in the best condition it can be and whatnot. So it's almost like the routing really never ends until you actually get the run. I think that's sort of the mentality I try and approach with.
Like having a clear picture of the splits of the runs themselves, not just like a half-heart. Well, I won't say half-hearted because that seems to lessen it a bit, but having like a general thought of the strats for each one, having practice, but maybe not having like a clear run through of what you're going to be doing for each one, having that clear view first, and then having the mentality of, okay, I've got that clear view, now I can quote unquote start doing runs, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
It's in it.
It's like the mental side of doing these runs is just as difficult as, I don't know, the physical, like actually executing it side, where just keeping things together in your head. And like everybody does it, but try and minimize the amount of times where like you completely panic in a situation. Something goes wrong, you just try and respond as best as you can. And yeah, sometimes you're going to get screwed over. These games are tough. They always have been and they always will be. But, just try and respond as best you can. And when something does go wrong, take the time to understand it immediately afterward. Like really sit down and think, okay, well, what just happened? Like, did I really make a mistake, or did the game kind of not? These games are imperfect. Let's be clear about that. They do not work as intended 100% of the time. And sometimes that happens and it'll end your run. Is there something you can do to avoid that? Or is it just some amount of RNG that you're going to have to accept? There's a lot of aspects to it that you got to consider and try and, I guess, just trying to maintain the right mental attitude the entire time is the goal. It's tough to do, but when you do that, like there'll be times when I get hit on a run and I'm not even upset. I just don't understand what happened and I need to know. That's like what I want to happen on a run. When something goes wrong, I want it to be a situation where there was just a knowledge gap and I can fix it and correct it. But I don't want to panic and I don't want to rage and slam my desk. Although, I mean, I'll admit I've done that before, but I try to avoid that because I don't think it really does me any favors. I don't really learn anything. I don't really gain anything and benefit in the end. I just end up upset that things didn't go my way. So the mental game is just as important as anything else. And sometimes it's also good to take a break from doing this kind of stuff when you are feeling that frustration. It's fine to step away from something, put a run aside for a little while, come back and revisit it. And sometimes you'll find that you go through, you come back and de-rust on a run and you realize, oh man, this doesn't feel good at all, and now you want to make some changes, and sometimes that's necessary. So it's not always easy to recognize in the moment, but try and take a step back every once in a while and look at things in general and see how you feel about it all and what's realistically the next best step for you in that. I feel like I might have been veering off track here, so I'm not sure. Yeah, we may want to bring it back a little bit, but the mental game is really important in these runs, and that's something that just like in general you really want to think about from time to time is how do you feel about it, because it makes a big difference. It really does.
Yeah, I think like a very obvious thing to everyone, but something that needs to be remembered also is that RNG, the R stands for random. There is going to be weird and random stuff that's going to occur in a run, which doesn't mean that it's unavoidable. It just means there are outcomes or possibilities that exist that can occur randomly that you just need to learn from, especially in like these sorts of runs, that these things can happen. And it's just about being aware of them, whether from your own experience or maybe someone who else has got experience, and being able to share that and being able to learn and like take that on in routing or in the actual runs.
And it's just funny. Something you said just reminded me, like with the element of randomness, sometimes it can work in your favor too. And yeah, you just got to remember that the randomness of these games is everywhere. Like it's in everything. And these it's tough what we're doing. Trying to deal with that much randomness is very difficult. And there was a runner who recently talked about something that happened in Dark Souls 3 where one of the bosses didn't behave the way that they're supposed to on a phase transition. You get their damage so low, they switch to a phase transition, and then the fight is supposed to play out a bit differently. And this person is working on a no-hit speed run, and the randomness actually saves them time in this case. So now this person is going to be running against a split, that particular segment of the run where like a 1 in 1,000 RNG allowed them to save a couple of seconds, and they will never reliably be able to do that on another run. And that's got to be really frustrating as a speedrunner when you've got that in your splits and your timings and you're running against it. You don't have that on no hit. So that's one thing that like the element of randomness in no hit runs I think is maybe a little bit more comfortable to deal with than it is on like something like a speed run. But it's just funny because that just came up yesterday and it was just in my mind. So yeah, the element of randomness is tough. You deal with it the best you can, but sometimes the game screws you over and it happens. You deal with it, you move on.
Yeah, the tiny example actually, just from what you were saying earlier about doing the randomizer speed run of this RNG and that squirrel deciding to just jump in Torrent's path and like lose you that couple of seconds.
Oh my gosh.
RNG everywhere.
That's actually so tilting, that situation. It really is. And I see other like people who actually do speedruns have the exact same reaction. Like there's the littlest tiny thing can get on your nerves. It is very true. Very true.
Isn't just flashback PTSD from that moment there. So you've gone, at least from what I saw, so going from 165, you're now going to 207, aren't you? Or the DLC included. How's that been going?
It's actually been pretty fun. So yeah, now I've recently been working on all bosses no hit, including the DLC, and again, sorcery only. I'm not doing the extra restriction where I have to acquire and use every offensive sorcery in the game. That was really fun to do once, but the DLC sorceries are pretty disappointing, to be honest, and I'm just not really motivated to do that particular aspect of the run again. And I like the idea of trying to optimize this run to be like, there's a lot of setup that happens in sorcery runs. I can't emphasize enough how much there is, but trying to make it a little bit more efficient and bring down, like, just not have it be a super long run. Because yeah, when I did all the base game bosses, I think the IGT was a little bit, the in-game time was a little bit over 13 hours, which really is not bad compared to other all boss no hit runs in Elden Ring. It's actually really not bad at all, considering all the extra work that I did getting all the extra sorceries and finding a way to use them and all that kind of stuff. So I was actually pretty happy with that. But I was going for, all bosses plus DLC, sorcery only, and a reasonably efficient run. And that's been really fun to work on because I've done exactly what I was talking about earlier, like constantly rerouting. Every single time that I start up sort of running through the game, I'll start noticing, even in the early game, that like, man, this really doesn't make sense. Like, why don't I move this around, this around, this around? And you start, like, I start focusing on trying to get all the good stuff, all the useful tools available in the game, get them as early as possible, and it helps get your build set up very strong, relatively quickly, and then from there things just fall into place really easily. And it's actually been really fun to try and reroute the game in that way, where I'm really just making my build as strong as possible, as quickly as possible, and getting all the good stuff, because then the rest of the run is like kind of smooth sailing. It just feels very natural to do it that way. So it's been very enjoyable to go back and revisit that run, except that Rykard is still a problem. Even with the strat that I used previously, I still have all of those same sorceries available, so I'm not going out of my way to do anything different. But even so, even with all the extra levels and all the extra goodies that we get in the DLC, I still really can't come up with anything better for Rykard yet. I was actually trying it last night a little bit more, and I'm still struggling with it. So that's still a puzzle piece to figure out. I still don't know what I want to do there. I actually started working on this run right after the DLC came out. I went through and routed it pretty much right away to just get an idea of like, how does this build feel? Does it seem like it would be worth doing this run? And at the time, there were two things that killed my interest. And one was Consort Radon at the end of the DLC, because at the time he was busted, and they did eventually patch him. They did eventually, thankfully, patch him. So there's that. So, all right, that's one problem down. The second problem is Jory. And Jory is an absolute pain for sorcery runs. What a horrible boss. boss. So start summoning a bunch of extra enemies once its health is down. Like, you start the fight at 100%, and when he's down just 10%, when he's just at 90% of his health bar,
Yep.
he starts summoning and warping away and doing all this other nasty stuff.
Yep.
And it's horrible. It's horrible to deal with on a sorcery build. We have like so few things that are effective at dealing with that fight that is just terrible. And so I dropped the run initially, and then I did eventually come back to it a few months later, I think in like September or October, and I started revisiting it, and I found some stuff for Rykard. I found some stuff I'm sorry, not Rykard. I found some stuff for Consort Radon that was starting to work, but this was before they had actually patched him. So I was actually surprised that they patched Radon, to be honest, but I'm glad they did. But I at least had something in mind. It's like, okay, there's something I can do, and it seems to work. But I still didn't have anything for Jory, and I lost interest again. But probably a week or two ago, if you guys don't know V-Sweat is another no-hit runner. He's been around forever, and he's also working on all bosses no-hit, and he's been using a build. It goes back and forth a bit, but he is using a fair bit of sorceries. And just one day I was watching him, and I was motivated to like, okay, let me pull up my Jory save file and see if I could come up with something. And I actually did, kind of. Like, it's really, really tight execution, but it kind of works. And so I was like, okay, well, you know what? Maybe I'll take a look at the whole rest of the run and see how it feels now. And it's been really fun to revisit that run. That was the whole reason why I revisited that run after months of routing, taking a break, rerouting, taking a break again. And here I am looking at it again. So that was sort of the reason for reviving that run. And everything feels really good except for Rykard, and Consort Radon is still rough because probably what's going to happen. There's a sorcery called Carian Slicer for anyone who doesn't know. It's almost like a melee attack, but you're just using your magic staff, and it's very, very effective. It's one of the best spells in the entire game, and it's incredibly strong. And pretty much what's probably going to happen is 10 hours or more into the run, I'm just going to have to go in and find Consort straight up with Carian Slicer because I don't have any other choice. I don't have enough damage to script him or to cheese him in any meaningful way. So I just have to fight him straight up after so many hours of one-shotting bosses. Then I have to go in and fight one of the hardest bosses they've ever made, and I'm definitely not going to be nervous at all at that point, I assure you.
Of course.
So it would be tough to do, but that is like kind of what it currently looks like. It would be doable, but it would be very tough. So it's been very enjoyable revisiting that run. The DLC is okay for like no hit stuff. It's not amazing. Actually, I kind of forgot when I initially routed through that, what I intended to do was all remembrances plus DLC. I wasn't intending all bosses. I just wanted to do all the remembrance bosses, but it quickly became clear, okay, if I'm going through and doing even just the remembrance bosses, it's probably worth it for me to do some of the extra setup that I had previously done in all bosses to get this spell and this talisman and yada, 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 all this other stuff. So if I'm doing that, why not just go ahead and route it for all bosses anyway? Because I'm doing all the setup anyway. So why not? And that's just kind of how that all came in together. But yeah, it's been fun to do that. The problem is that I was even working on this run yesterday, and then literally like 5 minutes after I end my stream, Convergence dropped their new update, and I don't know when I'm going to get back to the all bosses run because Convergence dropped their big update. And for those who don't know what Convergence is, it's an overhaul mod for Elden Ring, and it changes kind of everything: weapons, spells, bosses, dungeons, even basic progression through the game is different, but it's very, very fun to play. I really enjoy it, and they just dropped a very big update, a lot of changes that I'm really looking forward to. And actually some of the people who are on the Convergence team are no hit runners themselves, and they do consider some things, like when they're designing some of the changes they want to make, they do consider what it would do to like no hit runs and speed runs. They don't necessarily completely designed around that, but they will make some changes from time to time to accommodate that kind of thing, which is really cool. And that's very likely what I'm going to be doing in the near future. Is they're probably going to do a speedrun bounty in Convergence, and I have previously routed some no-hit stuff in Elden Ring Convergence, and I want to revisit that. So it's going to be tough. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do. I do have this all bosses run to work on, but now there's Convergence, and that's really fun to do, and I only have so much time, so I don't know what's going to happen. But either way, it's an exciting time to be running Elden Ring because there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, there's so much going on even now, like so many new stuff being created, added, mods created. events people are putting up. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's been out almost 4 years, 3 years, and it's as fresh as ever, it seems, with the amount of
Yeah.
creative stuff people are doing with it or applying with it.
Yeah, that's and like on the topic of mods or whatever for Elden Ring, the randomizer, if anybody plays the game on PC and hasn't checked out the item and enemy randomizer, it is an incredibly fun way to replay Elden Ring. There's so much to experience with it, and it's a very well-made mod. There's a lot of really cool options, and the guy who made it, the fifth Matt, he has put a lot of time and effort into a lot of quality of life improvements to just make it run better, less crashes and stuff like that, and less really cursed encounters, or you maybe have the option to, kind of do that kind of stuff. It's a really, really fun way to play the game. It's familiar because it's still Elden Ring, but it will be a different experience every time, and it encourages you to try so many different things that you may have never touched in the game. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, I did want to say touch on Randomizer because I feel I've seen at least your name and having done stuff in several Randomizer related events, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
Probably not the best way.
Yeah.
So like the
Right.
Forces League, Zoodle's Randomania, Randomizer races, which was like a big thing before the DLC. Obviously they're still going on now, but I remember before the DLC there was like a big time where everyone was doing Randomizer races every day or every week.
Yeah.
Or, looks like so.
Absolutely.
I'll say obviously went a little bit into there, but what is personally for you like the appeal of like going more into randomizers and keep doing those?
Yeah, pretty much like what I was just saying a moment ago is that it's still Elden Ring. It's it's not the sort of curated experience that FromSoft have crafted for you, but it's still the same stuff. It's just a different experience every time, and that just keeps it so fresh. It's when you're playing the vanilla game, you can find ways to replay it and have fun with it, but like no hit runs are a good way of doing that, I think, because you've got a challenge in mind. But at the same time, there's only so much that you can really do with the game before it feels like you may have sort of seen and done everything. And for some people, there's that feeling of the game will get a little stale after that point. And at least for me, the randomizer really gets rid of that. Like it's a fresh new experience every single time. I get that feeling of, I can go and explore and discover again because I can go around to different areas and just loot stuff and see what I get lucky finding and what can I do with all the stuff that I find. What sort of build can I put together? Can I make this weapon work? Can I go fight this boss in this arena so I can progress, or do I need to try something different? It's just a very fun experience to go in and have no idea what you're going to encounter. It almost feels like a first playthrough. Like you never know you don't know what's going to be in Margit's arena when you go there the first time. And how well can you adapt to the boss that's in there and defeat it and move on and do the same thing for another dozen or so bosses until you beat the game, something like that. And that's what the randomizer feels like. You never know what you're going to get. And sometimes, like in the base game, even in the vanilla game, they've got this tendency to put fun bosses in horrible arenas, like arenas that just do not work well with them at all. Fire Giant being one of the best examples, easily.
Slant.
And when you're over in Dragon Barrow, the Blackblade Kindred is just on the side of a hill, and it's horrible to fight him there. But when you get that Blackblade Kindred in a perfectly flat arena, one of the most fun fights in the game. Like it's actually just so satisfying to find them somewhere where you can actually fight them fairly. And that's what you get sometimes. Now you're also going to get the flip side where there's those cursed encounters where you have Fire Giant inside a small cave and he blasts you and you have nothing. There's like nothing you can do.
Yep.
But that's what the randomizer is about. You never know what you're going to get. How well can you adapt to what's thrown at you? And how resourceful can you be? Okay, I know that I have this really tough combination of this boss in this arena. The weapon that I have now is maybe not great. Do I have another weapon available? Do I have the upgrade materials? Is there anywhere that I can go explore a little bit more and find something else that might work? All that kind of stuff. It forces you to play the game a little bit differently and to adapt a bit. And for me, that's a really satisfying way of playing the game, is trying a little bit of a new experience and trying to adapt to it each time. And how well can you do that? That's sort of what the randomizer does for me. And the randomizer in Elden Ring in particular is very well designed. There's tons of options in there, and it makes it so that like even in terms of randomizing the game, you can do it in completely different ways every time. And you can also make challenge runs out of it. You can make deathless runs out of it if you want to. If you're Aggie or Gino or someone, you can attempt course, no-hit randomizer. I mean, other people have done it too, but they're some of the more notable people who have attempted that kind of thing. So it's just a completely different side to the game where you get everything shuffled around a bit and you get to have a bit of a fresh experience. And it's a really, really fun way to play the game. And the Dark Souls 3 randomizer is very similar. And I did the same thing for a while in Dark Souls 3. I did a lot randomizer speed runs where I would just roll a fresh randomizer seed and try and complete it as fast as I could, completely blind. And that was a really fun challenge because, yeah, there's a lot of RNG to it, but it's just really fun to start with a weapon I've never used before and see how well I can do with it, or how well can I make a build along the way and all that kind of stuff. It's very satisfying to work through that, and especially when it all comes together and works well. Actually, one of my favorite runs that I've ever done, and I like usually when I'm talking about my runs, I don't really think of most of them in terms of like, do I like this run or not? But this is very clearly an exception. Is I did SL1 Deathless in Dark Souls 3 Randomizer. It didn't include the DLC. It was only limited to the base game, but that was genuinely one of the most challenging and satisfying runs that I've ever done. And every single time, you never know what you're going to get. You have to adapt to what's thrown at you. And there are definitely some times where I just lost runs because of bad RNG. This when you get Aldrich in the Nameless King arena and he warps a mile away and he does his horrible ranged attacks and there's nothing you can do and you have limited stamina and it just goes wrong. That happens sometimes, but then when it comes together and you successfully get through it, man, that was such a satisfying feeling right there. That's one of my favorite runs ever right there. Even though I focused a lot on no-hit stuff, the Randomizer is just a very satisfying and fun way to play the game. And for anybody who plays on PC, I would definitely recommend checking them out. They're super fun, and I think you'll just have a fun, fresh experience with it. That's ultimately what it comes down to with that.
Yeah, and we touched on it a little bit earlier on with like the low damage runs that you've done, but I feel like SL1, or Soul Level 1, the acronym, and low damage runs in general are such a good way to both learn and appreciate a lot of bosses' movesets, because you are literally forced into learning a boss well, whether that is for hitless, for no damage, for deathless, and especially, as you say, in a randomizer where you can expect anything in any arena, you've got to know that boss is moveset very well, both for the self-imposed challenge of the SL1, but also knowing how to react, whether there's going to be barriers in the way or you've got a clear area. Like, it's such a good way to learn whichever challenge.
Yep, absolutely. There was I just mentioned exactly a situation that happened to me where I had Aldrich in the Nameless King arena, and that's how I lost a run. Unfortunately, it was really frustrating, but I knew I did as much as I could, and sometimes you just get bad luck. There was one other, again, it was Aldrich again. Aldrich is my nemesis in the randomizer for good reason. He's an absolute menace. Yeah, and definitely. I got him down in Yorm's arena, and for anybody who hasn't noticed, FromSoft have this affinity for rectangular arenas with pillars in the room, breakable pillars especially. They're everywhere. Yeah. They're everywhere. But so that happens in the Yorm arena, and the problem with having Aldrich anywhere is when you get to the point of phase transition, you can only do so much damage typically, and then Aldrich will warp away. And usually, like the way it works in the normal arena, it will warp to the opposite corner of where you are is the idea. But when that happens in a large arena, and especially in the randomizer, he can basically go kind of anywhere. And what happened was one of the pillars was still intact in the arena. So Aldrich spawned on the pillar, broke the pillar, which caused an animation cancel. Basically, the boss dropped to the ground and immediately went into an attack that I couldn't see. So I just got screwed over by bad luck in a completely niche situation that would only happen in certain arenas. Yeah. And that's the kind of stuff where, like, if you're going to go for, those kinds of challenge runs, sometimes you're going to just run into bad luck. But at the same time, the more that you do that kind of stuff, you'll gain that experience of like, oh, I know that this is a possibility in this arena. And maybe you can recognize it fast enough and like bone out of the arena, use a homeward bone to warp away and reset the fight and come back or something like that. But that was a huge test of, how much game knowledge do I have? How aware am I? How prepared am I going into this boss fight? And all of it comes together and I still lose the run to bad luck. So it just happens sometimes. But SL1 especially is like a really good restriction on that. I really enjoy doing that because it really challenged like how resourceful could I be in terms of what weapons were available at SL1. Did I explore enough to find some lucky stat boosting rings or good armor and good defensive rings or whatever? Any healing options that are available at SL1 and all this kind of stuff. It was a good test of like everything that I knew about the game, kind of brought all together in a single run. That's what that SL1 Deathless run kind of was all about. It was a big test of everything I knew about the game and how good I was at playing the game. So that was a very fun one, though. That was a really fun run to work on.
Out of curiosity, how does the Dragon Slayer armor butterflies work in a randomizer?
Well, when you go in, okay, so when you go into the Dragon Slayer armor arena, for anybody who isn't familiar with this fight, you fight one-on-one with basically a living set of armor in phase 1, and it's just a good one-on-one. When you get his health to a certain point, phase 2 happens, and flying outside the arena are 2 pilgrim butterflies, and these pilgrim butterflies have like 3 different types of ranged attacks, and each of them has a good audio cue to tell you, hey, I'm about to do this attack or that one or whatever. And phase 1 of Dragon Slayer armor is one of my favorite fights in the game. I can fight that armor all day and it is immensely fun and satisfying. But phase 2 with the butterflies, it's tough. And you can really get screwed over by some very niche situations that will happen, less than 1% of the time or something like that. But in the randomizer, when you go up to that arena, there will be a boss in the arena, and when you bring that boss's health down, whatever the number is, once the boss health is at like 65% or something, phase 2 initiates. The butterflies are there and they activate and they start doing their ranged attacks just like they would if the armor was there.
Okay, right.
So the armor, like when you go into whatever arena and you find Dragon Slayer armor, it is a good one-on-one fight every single time, no nonsense from anything else. And that's what's really fun about DSA and the randomizer is you actually just get to experience the good part of the fight without the bad part of the butterflies until you go up to the DSA arena later and then you find the butterflies are there anyway. But yeah, they're still there in the arena. It's just whatever boss is there, you bring the boss health down a bit and sort of phase transition happens and the butterflies become active. And good luck. That's how it goes.
It's just talking about all these, like the mods, the additional things that fans of the game has introduced and done it. It's a shame because some publishers take action against these sorts of things, and I think it's a real shame because so many of these like reignite interest and make sure games don't go stale. Like if nothing had been done, like with such a big game like Elden Ring, some people may not play it again because it's such a time investment to keep playing it again and again, being such a large game. But then it can be, well, there's a randomizer run. It's 3 hours and it's like pretty much fresh every time. You don't know whether you're going to get Bofra or Dancing Lion in Margit's arena, so there's a coin flip. Or Beast and Farm Missoula, just for people who don't know what Bofra is. Like all these things, and it's really great to see stuff still happening and the game as fresh as ever, obviously with everything that's been being done nowadays still.
Yeah, I don't know. We're all very fortunate, I think, that we're in this situation playing games where this kind of community involvement is not, being under attack by the developer.
Yeah.
We're very fortunate on that. So
knock on wood.
Yeah, right, exactly. Now, there was the case with Bloodborne. There were some fan-made things for Bloodborne, and I think those got taken down. I guess the best guess is that it's mostly Sony's doing. It's not FromSoft or Bandai Namco or whoever. So we're pretty fortunate that for the rest of the games, the community has been able to have all of these things available. And like for me, at least, that's like the randomizer is probably my most fun way of playing the game, the way that I enjoy it the most. So I'm really happy that we have that. And I would say the same with like Convergence mod. It's right up there as well, where it's a different take on the same sort of thing. But it's a passion project. They're not out there making that mod for profit or anything like that. And it's probably part of the reason why those mods are still out there and untouched is that, it's a passion project for people. They do it not to make money, but because it's a good thing for the community to have those. So we're all in a very fortunate position that we have such things available and we're not under attack from the developer to take those away. So let's hope it stays that way.
Definitely. Like say, a nearest piece of thing to knock on.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I just want to make one, because we've spoken a lot about routing today, so I think I just want to make one last point that before going to last couple of things for today. And that is, I think people who may not do these runs, obviously the completion of the runs, like the marathon runs or the super difficult runs, they get the headlines, they get the articles, they have that like firework moment where it gets everyone's attention. But I think for a lot of people, myself, and obviously it may be different for people, but a lot of people who I've spoken to, a huge enjoyable aspect for people is the routing, the working out, the puzzle solving, and And that sometimes I think gets missed because obviously it's the headlines of completed the run always gets the attention, but a huge aspect of people's enjoyments of these runs is the puzzle solving aspect.
Yeah, for sure. And to go along with that, it's, putting in the work to understand it, but also, there's a big community of runners that are just out there to help each other and share this info. It's not like I've done all this running and I'm going to keep it to myself and, get that running, get that attention and yada, yada, yada. There's a big community of no-hit runners that we share all this info. When people ask questions, we try and share, this is, what to do, what to avoid. Here's a good example of it happening. And this is the explanation of why it's happening because, at first glance, it doesn't make any sense. So it's been fantastic to be part of a community that's so, I don't know, we're just mostly friendly to each other. It sounds like in some of the earlier days, there was maybe a little bit less of that. I think I came in probably after that time, and I really have seen, with few exceptions, we're all just there to have fun and help each other out a bit. And I mean, that's what I want. I'm not as big on like maybe there's a bit. Well, I shouldn't even say that. I don't know if the like competitive elements would change anything like in a speedrun community, because speedrunners help each other out too all the time. There's no doubt about that. But I think maybe a community like this is more accessible to a lot of people. Maybe there's a bit less barrier to entry because there isn't such a competitive element to it. You maybe not as intimidated by the idea of trying to get into it by that. So it's just been like Team Hitless and the no-hit community in general has been just a very fun thing to be part of for the past 4 years, and I'm very grateful for that. So and that for the to a large extent, I try and carry that forward too. When I see somebody asking a question and I've got some obscure niche knowledge because I've run the game for thousands of hours, and there you go. I'll let you know what I think, and others will too, and hopefully that helps your understanding of it, and that just makes it easier to move forward with it. So yeah, it's an excellent community. I definitely recommend, like, if anybody out there is listening and even remotely interested in checking it out for themselves, Team Hitless is a fantastic place to start. Their Discord is open to anyone, and there's tons of good resources, guides and tutorials, a bunch of tools out there. They do community events and all this kind of stuff. So it's a great place to go. Check it out for yourself. See if you're, if it's what you're wanting. But I would definitely recommend it to anybody who's even just remotely interested in it. It's been a fun time.
Definitely. I pretty much agree with everything. And I think it also stems to something I think we spoke about at the very start of this conversation with the nature of hitless runs, of being completed something we can mark off and say, I've done this. And in that case, in a community aspect, it's saying, okay, I've done that, I can now help someone else do that, and then they can help someone else. Like, everyone is always helping someone else complete, as opposed to perhaps like in a scenario like a speedrun where it's the case of if you're better, like your time is going to be above someone. Obviously that's a bit, I don't really know what I'm trying to say there, but you know what I mean, there is a different nature of a hitless run versus a speedrun, like you say, competitive versus not competitive.
Exactly, very much. I think something that was definitely emphasized, I'm not saying more that it was emphasized more, but I don't think, maybe we could say it a little bit more often, just to reinforce it for people, is that these are personal challenge runs. They you're not out there you don't need to be out there to compete against others or anything. It's something you've got a goal to set for yourself. And I talked a bit about like the whole mental aspect of it. And I think one thing that's really helped me is just that approach of, I'm doing this because I want to. It's not a competitive thing. And there's nothing wrong with setting, like I've taken on runs and then set them aside because it just didn't feel good. I didn't feel like I don't know, lost out on something. I just knew that it was best to move on and try something else. But they are personal challenges. Your goal is to, really, no hit runs are not like the end all be all of challenge runs or something like that. There's plenty of different things you can do. And dare I say it, I think some of the runs I've done kind of showcase that, is that there's plenty of things you can do out there. Because I've dabbled in speed runs, randomizers, the vanilla game itself, small runs, all bosses, low damage, whatever. There's quite a variety out there. But at the end of the day, it is just a personal challenge. And ultimately, my goal is that I just want to get better at playing these games. And no hit runs are one way of doing that. They're just one milestone in that whole journey. There's more stuff that you can do. So go out there and try something. And if it doesn't work out, know that there's other stuff you can try and see what works best for you over time. But, ultimately, sort of the goal is I like playing these games a lot. I want to play them more and I want to play them better. And I'm doing things to help me in that endeavor or whatever. So if I'm working on something and I feel like it's not really benefiting me, then it's worth it to set it aside and work and do something else. So there's never any pressure or like, I don't know, feeling of shame or something like that. You just do whatever feels good with it and try and have fun. At the end of the day, that's what we're all here for anyway. We're all playing video games and trying to have fun with them. And it's nice to find a community of people who have a generally similar mentality. That's what we're here for.
Definitely. Right, Bender, I think we'll go into some quick questions and then I think we'll call it a day if that's okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Sweet. So we've talked about it quite a bit today, but if you had one piece of advice for someone new to Hitless running or new to challenge running, what would that advice be?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think I just said it over the past few minutes as well. Kind of two things in tandem. One, a place like Team Hitless is a fantastic place to get started. You're going to be welcome there. There's tons of things to help you do what you want to do and go in with the mentality that you want to learn about these games. I was talking about it earlier when I take a hit on a live run and it's something that I've never encountered before, there's no sense of like getting really upset over it. I just want to understand what happened and was there something I could have done to prevent it? Is it some niche situation that's pure randomness and I just kind of got screwed over? Really trying to understand the hits, and understand if it's a mistake that could have been corrected or whatnot. But again, your goal is to like learn and improve at the game so that you can do these kinds of runs or other challenges that you might want to do. But make use of the community and what's out there and really try and work on your mental game, trying to go in with a positive attitude and not letting things get to you too much. I think those two things in tandem allow a lot of people to do a lot of cool things in this community.
Agree with everything you said there.
Yeah.
If one game could... go on. Go on.
I have maybe one more thing to tack on at the end of that.
Yep, shoot.
Maybe don't jump in to a game and try and take on the most difficult runs of all time right at the start, because I have seen people attempt that and it's not good. Like it's just a recipe for burnout. If you want to take on like really difficult runs, anything like low damage, it's something that's good to build up to. Do stuff that's fun along the way. I think that was something that I maybe didn't handle it the best way, but like when I started doing runs in Dark Souls 3 especially, I found that like I really enjoyed running this game, and then I kept on kind of cranking up the difficulty a bit here and there. I'd tack on, now I'm doing all bosses, now I do level 1 no upgrades, and ultimately, a little over a year ago, I completed the master run all bosses, which is like, when you're talking about low damage runs, that's one of the most ultimate runs out there in a way. There's potentially more that could be done, but that's a pretty tough run. But I never like had that as a goal until the moment I decided to start going for it. There was just a day where I had there's a bit of a story to it, but the long story short is that I was working on this run for a Team Hitless event. It was level 1 weapon relay any percent. We were doing Team Hitless does a fundraiser in the summers, and I got invited to be one of 4 runners running Dark Souls 3. We were doing SL1 any percent, but aside from that, you could do whatever you wanted. And I started working on this weapon relay run, which was really, really fun. It's one of my favorite runs that I've ever done. And after working on that and after the event was done, I realized, man, I really, I had not been running Dark Souls 3 for a while. I was doing Elden Ring stuff. I got back to Dark Souls 3, did the event, and afterward realized, man, this has been really fun. And I realized I've like de-rusted on the game really well. If there's ever a chance for me to go for a big run like this, now's the time and I'm going to do it. And that was my approach, was that I didn't start going for it until I felt like I was ready for it. So try and avoid biting off more than you can chew. Like try and keep that in mind, because I've seen people do it and I've seen the burnout and I don't want to see it. So that was maybe the last little bit of advice there.
I don't think I managed to find a good segue into it, but I do want to recommend checking out on Bender's channel his master run of DS3, which I believe is NG+7, and then all the like weapon restrictions and SL1 we were talking about earlier, wasn't it?
Yeah. For anybody who doesn't know what the master run is, yeah, it's level 1, no weapon upgrades or infusions, new game +7 with a fresh character, nothing carried over from previous playthroughs, and it's new game +7 because in Dark Souls 3, new game +7 is the highest difficulty scaling. New game, you could go into new game plus, they scale difficulty a bit. That scaling caps out at new game +7, and every subsequent playthrough after that is essentially identical to new game +7. So yeah, level 1, no weapon upgrades, highest difficulty scaling, and I went for the any percent and got a best of 1 hit, and I decided I'm done with the any percent. I'm going to do all bosses, and then I did all bosses eventually. So that is what that run is about. And it's crazy because that's a run that, not to get sidetracked, but that was a run that, Gina was the only one who had done it for like 2.5 years. CBD had been working on that run for a while, but he was going back and forth so much between Elden Ring and Dark Souls 3. It took a while to get to the point of getting that run. But that run stood kind of solitary for 2.5 years. And then since then, I did all bosses. CBD did all bosses. Galvarn is an Italian runner, and he did the any percent. And just recently, Marshall completed all bosses. There's been like a second wave of people looking at the master run. And it's been completed in other games as well. It's been completed in Dark Souls 1. The any percent has been done. Sekiro has been done, the any percent, the Shura ending. And I believe more than that has been done. But I can't remember what Victor actually completed. So it's kind of wild that, like, for a while, there was just one person who had done this kind of run, and there's sort of this second wave of people coming in and doing such low damage runs now. It's wild to think about what the community will do in the future, because if stuff like this is becoming more accessible, well, then at some point, somebody's going to step up, take the bar a little bit higher, and it's going to be exciting to see what happens with that. It's kind of wild, so we will see.
I guess that's something we should have tacked on to the conversation about like competitiveness, because we mainly focused on the different between speedrunning and Hitless, but there is still a huge competitive aspect in Hitless, not in the sort of versus as it is in speedrun in terms of time, but more so if someone does a run in Hitless, there is normally someone to go, okay, but what if we did that but with this restriction, and then someone sees that and does it, goes, yeah, but what about 2 restrictions, and then it that's the way competitive works in Hitless.
Yeah, sort of. And that's one reason why I really like SL1 as a restriction, because I think it pairs well with a lot of other things. You can do it with no weapon upgrades. You can do it with a weapon relay. You can do it with a mimic head. That was something that I did a little over a year ago as well. SL1 mimic head was actually, I kind of wish I said something about this earlier. I did. So just to recap, it was SL1 all bosses no hit, but I wore the mimic head, the symbol of avarice, for the entire run. And the thing about that is that it's constantly draining your health. So at level 1, when you're constantly losing health, that's pretty tough. That's tough to deal with. And that is actually, after the master run, SL1 mimic head is the next most difficult run easily, because there is so much pressure on you for the entire run. Every single running section, you have to be calculated with how you deal, manage your healing. Every boss fight, you have to be aggressive, and you have to know when it's safe to do your healing so that you don't get screwed over and take a hit. And doing that for over 4 hours, that's nerve-wracking. That is really nerve-wracking. I that was a really tough run for sure. When I got that run and started working on the master run again, I remember getting to a point and saying, man, this is so much more chill than the mimic head run, because it was just, I could take my time in all the running sections. I knew what I was doing, and I could, take breaks when I wanted to or whatever. So SL1 is one of those cool restrictions that pairs really well with a lot of things, and I think it encourages some creativity, which is really nice to see. So that's something I would really like. If you enjoy running a game, consider running it at level 1 and seeing what you come up with and have fun with it. That's a good thing to do.
You get a good appreciation of a lot of bosses that you may have got previously. I did a couple of stuff with some of the DLC bosses in Elden Ring, especially Mesmer, which after only learning him Hitless and low damage became one of my favorite bosses.
Yeah. Now at the same time, when you get to low damage restrictions, then you start getting bitter, because you have to learn all of the terrible bosses that you never really want to learn, Curse Rotted Greatwood. And the amount of time that you have to spend to consistently defeat a boss like that with such low damage, it's really annoying. And it's just, sometimes it's like, man, I really wish I never spent so much time learning how to fight that boss, because it kind of feels like it was not worth it or something. I don't know. But it's I don't know. It's fun to restrict yourself and find new ways to play the game and find new ways to challenge yourself. So just keep on doing that and have fun with it for sure.
Definitely. If one game could could be released tomorrow, either an announced, unannounced, a new game, a remake, something they just wish to exist, what game would it be?
Subnautica 2.
Okay.
I actually am a big enjoyer of Subnautica, and actually like that style of open world crafting survival. Like I never really got into that, and I know that there's a ton of games that fit the bill and kind of follow the same formula, but the combination of Subnautica, like the environment and with it being an indie developer, and no joke, the whole, terrors of the deep, thalassophobia, whatever you call it, it all comes together really, really nicely. And I'm actually really looking forward to the next one. I know that it's going to be in early access whenever it releases, and it's going to take years to get fully released, but I'm really looking forward to it, actually. I don't usually follow new releases all that much, but Subnautica is actually on my radar big time. So there it is.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of Hades 2, which is still in early access, which I still haven't checked out, even though I really loved the original one. But I've been basically delaying because I'm just waiting for the full release. But then they always, like, every second week, I'm just going, should I try it? I mean, it's been out for a good while now. Should I just have a go? We'll see how we turn. We'll just see how we go with that. Eventually, I might just decide to buy it.
Yeah, but yeah, that's about the only game that's really on my radar. I can't think of anything else.
If you could recommend one game for its soundtrack, which game would it be?
Ooh. Oh, for its soundtrack, that's tough. So I really like games that have good ambient music, and like there's games like I think Oblivion and Skyrim were games that really intrigued me in the past, like years ago, and I haven't played them in years, so I kind of like I hear the soundtrack every once in a while for those, and it's still really, really good. But another series that I really enjoyed was Deus Ex. Deus Ex Human Revolution and Mankind Divided actually have some really good ambient audio music, like ambient soundtrack. And I just turn that on sometimes in the background because of that. But like, I guess there's a difference, because for games like that, I can just put that music on in the background and enjoy it while I'm working on something or whatever, doing chores or something. But for a game that has a soundtrack that pairs really well with the experience of the game, like that soundtrack is just, when you hear it, you're instantly reminded of the experience you had with the game. It's not just music you enjoy, you're specifically reminded of how it felt to play that game for the first time. And actually Subnautica is in that list as well, but Outer Wilds. If anybody hasn't checked out Outer Wilds, you've got to. And I can't say any more than that. Like, you can't talk about that game because it's just spoiler city. But the music for that, every time I hear it, I just want to, like, I wish I could just go back and re-experience that game for the first time every single time I hear it.
The funny thing with that, that's been in my library gathering dust for like at least a year, maybe 2 years at this point, and I basically have the same experience when speaking to people about it, where like they're saying, okay, you can only play it once kind of thing, or experience it once, so avoid all spoilers like the plague. And
Exactly.
Managed up to now, but eventually would need to get around to it because I feel I'm pushing my luck at this point.
Yeah, that's nothing about the content of the game itself, but it's also great because if you do play that game and enjoy it, there's a really nice YouTube documentary. It's like less than an hour long about the making of that game, and talking about like the team. It was a small indie developer. If I remember right, what was it? I don't know if it was GoFundMe or something like that. One of those crowdfunding kind of websites. I think that's how this game got started. It was like a college project that somebody made, and then it was like crowdfunded, and it kind of worked its way up from there. And it's just an incredible experience. I can't really say much more than that. But if you do have it, I would definitely recommend checking out, and try and go in without spoilers 100%. maybe you can like go look at like generally what the gameplay kind of looks like, so you have some idea, but I wouldn't even do that. I wouldn't even recommend that. Just go in blind and try it, and try and have fun with it, and be curious with it. That would be the only recommendation I would say about it. But yeah, there you go.
That's going to be added to my list though, because I do love a good video game documentary. Yeah, people listening on YouTube, there is like several good ones that I've There's a couple of the grounded ones, which is for The Last of Us and Last of Us Part 2. God of War had one for the 2018. Horizon Zero Dawn had one. And there's a couple of others that I've seen. So just go on YouTube if you're interested in that sort of thing. There's some really good documentaries on those games.
Yeah. So it's that's a good time. That's one of those games. I was so surprised. I will say one more thing about that, and again, not really about the content of the game, is that the base game experience, everybody raves over it. There's a bit of a cult following, all this other stuff. I had no idea that they made a DLC until it literally was released. And when I heard about it, I was like, how could you make a DLC for that? And as much as I love the base game, I had just as good of an experience, if not better, with the DLC. So it's one of those games where, like, not only is it good, but there's a little bit more of it that you can go and enjoy as well. And I was very impressed with that. That came out of nowhere, and that's a game I'll never forget.
And there's meant to be isn't there a sequel announced at the last year or the Game Awards or something?
So there's Outer Wilds and Outer Worlds, and it's really unfortunate that those two games came out so close to each other with such similar names, because I think this happens where I think Outer Worlds 2 was announced. I believe that's what it is.
I think you might be right. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, it looks like there is an announced sequel for Outer Worlds. I'm not sure how a sequel for Outer Wilds would possibly ever go. You could almost consider, well, no, I don't think you really could. Yeah, I'm going to stop talking about that.
Okay, no. No worries.
I'll say too much.
Say penultimate question would be, what, if you can think of one, if the one jumps out, what would you say is your most hyped or fond memory that you've had in your streaming or challenge run career so far?
That's a tough one. Sort of. Actually, it's not. I can answer that one pretty easily. I talked about it earlier, just a little bit ago, that about a year and a half ago, over the summer, Team Hitless hosts a fundraiser every year, and we got invited. So again, to recap, we were 4 runners. Well, there was more than that, but ultimately what was happening for our portion of the event was 4 runners. We were running Dark Souls 3 no hit, and we were doing SL1 any percent. So level 1, you stay at level 1 the entire time, you don't increase it. But other than that, we weren't restricted in any real way. You could make it your own. And that event was really fun. So I got to run against Leo Vernard, who mostly does no-hit speedruns. And he held the record in Dark Souls 3 for a long time. And it only kind of recently got broken. So very good at what he does. So running against him is already intimidating no matter what. And then Miko Losh TV, who I learned a lot about Dark Souls 3 from him, so it was really fun to run against him. And Lasense, who is, I think, like a little bit newer of a runner, like compared to the rest of us, but he's done a ton of good runs, and he's done some good challenging ones too. So Leo ran SL1 no upgrades any percent, which is ridiculous for an event, and he was faster than any of us, but he did take quite a few hits. It was an unfortunate day. He had some bad luck. He had some really bad luck that day. I remember that. That was rough. Miko had some rough luck. He got hit right away, and he took a few more hits. Lasense got a really unfortunate dog situation where a dog aggroed when it normally doesn't, and dogs in Dark Souls 3 are not kind to you, so unfortunately he took a hit there and a few more afterward. But I did my run. It was level 1 weapon relay, so 13 bosses in the any percent, 13 different weapons. I would switch up the weapon for every single boss fight, and that's a really fun run to do because, like, there's a lot to consider when you route something like that, and you can approach it in an entirely different way than what I did. So anybody could go and do that kind of run and make it their own. What I did is what I thought made sense for me, but others could do it completely different, and it would still be a fun and interesting run. But I did my run, and I completed it 0 hits during the event, and I was ecstatic about that. That was like, nice. Man, everything came together just nicely for that run. So the year prior, I was a runner in whatever run we were doing for the same kind of fundraising event the year prior, and I got hit like 5 minutes in, and I was so upset about it. Like, I was so annoyed because it was just such a nonsense thing, and I knew that I could do better than that and whatever. So I went into the event like a year and a half ago, and, you know, I just wanted to do better than the year before. That was my only goal, and I did one of the coolest runs I've ever done live, 0 hits, and I think faster than I'd ever done it, and I'm pretty happy about that. That was like, that's kind of one of the highlights of streaming or no hit or anything that I've ever done. That right there is one of my favorite moments, hands down.
That's like that's sort of like dream occasions, isn't it? Being able to like pull out a run, but also at such a great event as well.
Yeah, that was a really fun one, and it was great too because like the commentary that day too was just great. Like everybody was on point, having fun with it. Maybe the commentators didn't notice that I had like they didn't know what weapons I was even using half the time, and it was funny because I had the names of the weapons in my splits, and they didn't notice it until I was on my way to DSA. So pretty late in the run, but it was a funny moment. But it was a really good time. It was a really good event, and I was just so happy to get that run 0 hits. I had one really close call during Twin Princes, but I got away with it, and that was a really enjoyable day right there.
Perfect. And I think final question for today will be, what are the future plans of BenderZGreat?
Gotcha. I talked a lot about Convergence earlier, and that is very much on my radar. They just dropped their new update like 24 hours ago. So I will be playing that quite a lot. They have a speedrun bounty planned. So that is going to be all base game remembrances speedrun. And I'm really looking forward to that because I was not around when the Convergence team made the Dark Souls 3 Convergence mod, and they had a similar bounty back then. So I want to be involved with it this time. I have already routed some no-hit stuff in Convergence, and I want to revisit all that now that the new update is here. I do still have the all bosses no-hit run. I don't want to just drop that, but it's so hard to do all this stuff with such limited time. So I will see what happens, but probably Convergence in the immediate future. Return to the all bosses run, sure. Maybe go back to Dark Souls 3 for some random thing here or there, but maybe finally try running a different game for once, because I've been running like Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring for the past 3 years nonstop. I keep on going back and forth between them. I should really try a different game, and that would either be Dark Souls 2 or Sekiro, and I don't know which one yet. So I would like to run a different game at some point, but I need to actually just commit one day and do it. So that's what's on my radar for now.
And if people wanted to check you out, where would they be looking?
Yeah, so I am on Twitch. That's mostly what I do is I stream on Twitch. I do post some stuff on my YouTube. Right now, my name on Twitch is BenderZGreat, but the is it has a fake I. It's actually a lowercase l. That name may be changed back to BenderZGreat pretty soon. So you can mostly find me on Twitch, and I do post some stuff on YouTube, but you can also find me in the Team Hitless Discord. So if you run Dark Souls 3 or Elden Ring and you post in there, you might see me from time to time as well, but that's pretty much where you'll see me.
Perfect. And whichever name it ends up being, there'll be a link in the description to whichever case it ends up being.
I'll probably have the Z back in a couple of months when I can actually change my name again. So we'll see what happens though.
Well, Bender, I super appreciate it, especially taking a bit longer today than I originally said it would. So I appreciate taking some extra time for today and finally managing to get this done for us both.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was a bit of back and forth trying to find a time when we were able to actually sit down and do this. Some illnesses and whatnot happening during this time of year. It is what it is. But thank you so much for having me. I know that we went a bit longer than planned, but I hope everybody enjoys. And I hope to see some people maybe doing some runs in the future. I would like to see some new people joining and trying it out for themselves. And if not, maybe I'll see you around just to watch anyway and chat and whatnot. So hopefully I see you guys in some way, shape, or form in the near future.
Yeah, super appreciate anyone who's taken the time to listen today, and we'll hopefully see you for the next one. If you enjoyed that conversation and want to hear more with amazing guests, be sure to head over to youtube.com/@nohitpodcast or wayofloci.com/nohitpodcast